Narnia is a series of books that follow children as they enter or explore the magical world of Narnia. It is primarily a portal fantasy written by C.S. Lewis. The stories feature adventure, prophecies, mythological creatures, talking animals, and Christian allegorical elements. I first read all of these books when I want to say 10 years old. A family friend saw that I was a really big reader, and she let me borrow all of her books when she saw how obsessed I was with the fantastic 2005 adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I am now in my late 20s, and it's been a while since I've read all of these. The only one that I have read more than once was the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because I bought this copy when I was still living in Savannah, Georgia, in a used bookstore. And I told myself that I was going to get all of them individually at some point in my life so that I could reread them. And after I decided to read the Oz books, I thought, well, Narnia should be my next project. It's not that many books. And I got them earlier this year, and I knew that I wanted to make these videos. Because even though I haven't reread most of these in a really long time, I've always held a very special place in my heart for Narnia. I even have the lamppost as a mural inside my closet. I was really excited once I collected all of them because that means that I could reread them all in a row, and some scenes definitely stood out to me. Some for better reasons than others. It was definitely an emotional roller coaster to get to read all of them again because some scenes did not hold up as well as I was hoping that they would. But I want to talk about it. Hi everyone, my name is Gabby. I am an illustrator from Puerto Rico, and I usually use this channel to share my art, whether that's a time-lapse drawing, a crafting video, a sketchbook tour. I'm really getting into sewing, so every now and then I like to share a cosplay or two, and I really like books. I specifically really like children's books, and I like horror books, but we're going to talk about children's books today because for some reason I really want to talk about Narnia. The series starts with Narnia's creation and ends with an apocalyptic finale. I was not joking about the Christian influence, and if that's something that annoys you for whatever reason, you may not like the rest of these videos because you will not like how heavy-handed the rest of these 7 books are about to be. I originally wanted to quickly summarize all 7 of the books and then yap a little bit at the end about Christian symbolism, maybe a little bit about C.S. Lewis's life to provide further context, kind of like how I did my Oz video. However, I quickly realized as I was reading these that these books are just slightly more advanced than the Oz books, even though they're still absolutely written for children. And honestly, with the Oz books, I wasn't about to summarize 15 individual books, which is why I did it that way. I just wanted to plow right through it because there's so much to talk about that I didn't want to have to do this for that many videos. But for these, I think I've decided that I'm going to take it one video at a time. So every video is going to be dedicated to a different book. The Magician's Nephew, which is the first book that I'm going to talk about, was actually a prequel. This was published as the 6th book in the Narnia Chronicles in 1955. And most reprintings of the Narnia Chronicles until around the 1980s also reflected the original publication order. So if I were to be doing this in publication order, this would actually be my 6th video. But because I'm doing this in chronological order, we're starting with The Magician's Nephew. Before getting into this book, let's talk about the author real quick. Clive Staples Lewis was born in Belfast, Ireland in November 29th, 1898. As I'm filming this, it's actually been 2 days since his birthday. He was an author, literary scholar, and a professor of medieval and Renaissance literature at Cambridge University. He was inspired by Greco-Roman, Norse, and Irish mythology, as well as Christian imagery, medieval literature, and the work of other children's authors like Edith Nesbit and Beatrix Potter. At a young age, Lewis tragically lost his mother to cancer, and he was an atheist by the time he was 15 years old. Though he later described his younger self as being paradoxically angry at God for not existing, and equally angry at him for creating a world. However, by the end of his life, Lewis considered himself to be an entirely Orthodox Anglican. That's important for later. Lewis was also a veteran, having been shipped off by the British Army to France to fight in the First World War, experiencing trench warfare for the first time on his 19th birthday. Back to the topic of religion real quick, I think that it's very important that we acknowledge that these books are set in a Christian fantasy world. We cannot talk about Narnia without discussing the religious elements. I just don't think we can do that. And I can understand why some people refuse to engage with Narnia once they realized how deeply Christian it was, or don't want to read the rest of C.S. Lewis's work because of how devoted he was to his faith. Non-religious readers may find it distasteful or preachy, especially if they've completely distanced themselves from the church or Christianity as a whole, or have some kind of religious trauma. But I think even if you're not religious, you can still have fun analyzing these books with me. So if you'd like to stick around for the next few videos, I would really appreciate that. I myself am not particularly religious. I was raised Catholic. I had a communion and everything. If you go to my grandma's house, you'll see pictures of me in a little veil. It's like the only wedding dress I'm ever gonna wear. But I can count on my hands the amount of times that I've been to church in the last 10 years, and every single one of those visits was motivated purely by funerary services or tourism. Because what can I say? I love a good stained glass window. The point is, I'm a non-practicing Catholic. I'm culturally Catholic. I fear that if you were raised Catholic, there's always a little bit of it inside you, even if it just manifests as guilt every now and then, or you just get really into the Hunchback of Notre Dame. Point is, I'm not religious. That being said, the religious parts of the Chronicles of Narnia don't really bother me at all. In fact, in my opinion, they're the most interesting parts of the series. While Lewis was clearly more interested in dogma and theology, and he really genuinely believed in Christianity, I see his use of religious imagery in his work the same way that I see my own use of religious imagery in some of my own artwork. It's what I know. It's part of my cultural background, and it's a really easy way to signify to the viewer or to the reader what I am trying to say. And if I were to pick up another series or book inspired by any other religion or mythology, I would feel the exact same way, because I find references to religion to be so fascinating. And I'll talk more about C.S. Lewis and how he viewed religion in his own works, and more about his personal life in later videos. But for now, I thought that I should include this in my little intro, because we're going to be talking about The Magician's Nephew, which includes a creation myth heavily inspired by Adam and Eve. And it's also a story about how evil enters Narnia. Set in London during the summer of 1900, two kids named Digory and Polly become friends. Since his father is off in India and his mother is incredibly ill, Digory and his mom now live with his mom's brother and sister, his uncle Andrew and his aunt Letty. Obviously, Digory and Polly like to play games with each other, and they're not really supervised by any adults at the time, so they discover a way to explore Digory's house by essentially going into what is a crawl space. And I am not gonna lie to you, when I first read this as a child, I thought that the magic part of the Chronicles of Narnia had already started, because I could not wrap my brain around what the heck was going on. I truly did not understand how any of this was possible. The whole crawl space and going rafter by rafter and attics and basements, all that stuff, because I'm from Puerto Rico and every house I've ever lived in has been made entirely out of cement. I can't go inside the walls. That's rock solid. So whenever I used to watch movies and I could see somebody like punch a hole through the wall, or they could see the insulation inside a house, I never truly understood that until I figured out that houses are just made differently. And since I hadn't read this book since I was like 10 years old, I had completely forgotten about this plot line. And I was positive as a child that they were already going through the portal without knowing it, by going through the houses, by going in between the walls of the house. I am now old enough to understand that that is not the case. I get it now, but just know that as I am reading that scene, I can only imagine that scene in Bob's Burgers where Bob is stuck inside the walls.
Oh, wait, I can go sideways, too.
Are you in another dimension?
Do you see a lion or a witch or a wardrobe?
A what?
A lion, a witch, or a wardrobe?
Why are you saying that, Gene?
While trying to explore the attic beyond Digory's house, because it's like a connected thing, they instead misjudge the distance and end up in Mad Uncle Andrew's study. And Uncle Andrew is a freak. Uncle Andrew is Digory's mom's brother, and Digory's always been uncomfortable in his presence. He's just a weird man. He's a magician, and he's been running experiments with these magic rings that could, in theory, transport him to another world, but he's too much of a coward to use them on himself, and instead he uses them on guinea pigs. They kind of just poof, disappear into another land, and he doesn't know what's on the other side. And there is a brief explanation as to how he was even able to do this, and it implies the past existence of both fairies and Atlantis, but it's not really relevant or mentioned again, so I'm not gonna discuss that right now. The doors are locked, and he traps the kids in with him in his study, and he forces Polly to touch one of the yellow rings, and she disappears. Very Bilbo Baggins of her, I do have to say. Digory is obviously concerned that his supervillain of an uncle just made his friend disappear, and so Uncle Andrew tells Digory, but of course you must understand that rules of that sort, however excellent they may be for little boys and servants and women, and even people in general, can't possibly be expected to apply to profound students and great thinkers and sages. No, Digory. Men like me, who possess hidden wisdom, are freed from common rules, just as we are cut off from common pleasures. Ours, my boy, is a high and lonely destiny. And if I were to say that Uncle Andrew represents classist British entitlement, and that he was really hoping to bond and connect with Digory on that level, and with that didn't work because Digory actually respects his friends, he instead resorted to blackmail, would you guys be mad at me? Because when I made a joke in my Oz video about how the wizard is literally just an average white American guy, you guys got real mad at me. And if you don't like me being political in my videos about children's books, you may not like what I have to say about any of the Narnia books in the future. Just FYI. Because Digory really wants to save his friend, he voluntarily becomes Uncle Andrew's new guinea pig. And he takes a yellow ring so that he can go and get Polly. And he takes 2 green rings in his pockets because green will return him back home. Yellow ring means otherworld. Green ring means back home. Got it? Good. And that's how Digory finds himself and Polly in a completely new dimension. This is not Narnia. They're not in Narnia yet. They're in a world that is basically just the woods, and there's a lot of pools around them, but not much else. It's trees and pools and silence. It's very much a liminal space. The longer you're in this dimension, the more at peace you start to feel, the more you start to forget about the world that you just came from. I fear that if you don't figure out how to get out of the wood, you just kind of fall asleep and stay there. I think that's the implication. We never go back to the wood after this book, by the way. But think about it as a mirror to Digory's crawl space. It's a transitional space. Wanting to explore the pools before going back to Uncle Andrew, the kids end up going into one specific pool. And once again, they're not in Narnia yet. That pool does not lead them to Narnia. Instead, that pool leads them to a world called Charn. And Charn is really ominous. It's eerily quiet. There's no people, there's no animals, there's no noise, nothing. The only thing around them are ruins. They enter a palace that is, for the most part, still standing, and inside that palace is a row of figures. And they're really confused because they can't tell if the figures are real people because they're completely still. They can't tell if they're real people or statues or something else because everything else is, destroyed, but all of the figures still have their clothing and their jewels relatively untouched, not decomposing, not faded. Everything is exactly as it was if these are still real people. Some kind of magic seems to be the only explanation, and in a very hocus pocus Max Dennison way, you know Digory just has to touch something he's not supposed to touch.
So let's light the sucker and meet the old broads.
Because in this room, there's also a bell. And on a pillar, it says, "Make your choice, adventurous stranger. Strike the bell and bide the danger. Or wonder till it drives you mad what would have happened if you had." In other words, Digory is really tempted to ring the bell. But this is when Polly wants to go home. She's seen enough. She's a spunky little girl, and she knows when things give horror movie vibes, and she wants to leave. But before she can take the ring that's still in her pocket, Digory manhandles her until he can ring the bell. This action will have consequences. But before we talk about what that consequence is, I do want to talk a little bit about the scene because I saw it as Digory being a mirror to Uncle Andrew. He was very critical of Uncle Andrew just a few chapters ago, but here he is forcibly taking a choice away from Polly, his friend who he claims to respect, but instead, knowing that she didn't want to be involved in this, he still grabs her hand and does it for her. I do like the way that C.S. Lewis is able to write this scene because the way that Polly feels is really important. Even though it's not the worst thing that a boy could do to his friend, he doesn't dismiss the way Polly feels about this, and he doesn't make excuses for Digory either. Polly was just beginning to cry, not with fear and not because he had hurt her wrist quite badly, but with furious anger. Within 2 seconds, however, they had something to think about that drove their own quarrels quite out of their minds. This is an action that weighs on Digory as well. The second he did it, he knew that he was wrong. I can't excuse what he did next except by saying that he was very sorry for it afterwards, and so were a good many other people. I don't want to read too much into this scene just because I do have some critiques of how C.S. Lewis writes the female characters later on in the Narnia books, but I do think that it's commendable that for the most part, the female protagonists are respected by the male protagonists. Almost every book has a equal distribution of the sexes when it comes to the protagonists. There's usually a boy and a girl, or 2 girls and 2 boys, that kind of thing. And I like that when the girls have something to say, they are usually listened to, or if they're not, that's usually the beginning of a moral lesson. Their feelings matter. They're allowed to argue with the boys. They're allowed to have complex emotions, benevolent misogyny aside. And everything that happens for the rest of the series is a direct consequence to how Polly was treated by Digory in this moment. He can't take it back because by ringing the bell, he has awakened Queen Jadis. I should have had an air horn to announce Queen Jadis. Do I have a crown? Hold on, I'm gonna look for a crown. I think I have a crown. This is all I got. Maybe I should have suffered through a quinceañera if it meant that I could have a bigger prop crown, because I didn't have anything to represent Glinda for my Wicked video either. I mean, I could make a crown. I'm just gonna skip ahead to the second book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, because there she's described as, but she's no daughter of Eve. She comes of your father Adam's first wife. Her they called Lilith, and she was one of the jinn. That's what she comes from on one side, and on the other side she comes of the giants. No, there isn't a drop of real human blood in The Witch. C.S. Lewis was a medievalist, so ignoring the fact that this is a kid's book, and I highly doubt that most children know who Lilith is unless they watch Supernatural Season 3 at an incredibly young age.
No.
Yes, it's me, Lilith.
It does make sense that he would include the figure of Lilith in this story. For a moment, humor me and pretend that I'm holding my big stack of Christian and Jewish folklore books from when I went through my little angel phase a few years back. They describe Lilith as being a female demonic figure from Jewish folklore. She's not a character from the Torah or the Bible, but she's kind of been absorbed. Her name and personality are thought to be derived from a class of Mesopotamian demons, and her name is usually translated to night monster. Lilith is a character that often preyed upon women and children and seduced men. So think of her like the Lamia from Greek mythology, or succubi, or even vampires. By the 7th century, women were reciting incantations against Lilith to protect themselves and their babies during childbirth. It could be argued that the mythology around Lilith was a manifestation of people's fears of infant mortality. Considering that the protagonists in all of the Narnia movies are children, it makes sense that Jadis is the big bad for 2 of those stories. Many of the traditional characteristics of Lilith in mythology are present in Lewis's depiction of Jadis, the White Witch. Lilith is often described as having long, dark hair, being incredibly pale, I will get back to that later, I promise, and having a hatred or fear of children and babies. If you've only ever seen the 2005 adaptation of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, then you might just picture Tilda Swinton when you picture Jadis, but Jadis is described as being 7 foot tall, having long dark hair. She is pale, she will get paler, like I said before, I'll get back to that, and she does in fact hate children. Fun fact, I have these prints that I made based off of Jennifer's body that I sold at KawaiiCon. I think I only have 4 of these left right now, so if you want one, hit me up. But I did base this fan art of Jennifer Check off of a pre-Raphaelite painting of Lilith by Rossetti. Even though Lilith is an incredibly old character in mythology, nowadays in pop culture, she has a very complicated reputation. Because in the 70s, a lot of feminists reclaimed Lilith as a feminist icon because they were reacting to the story in which she is Adam's first wife. In this legend, Adam and Lilith never really meshed well as husband and wife because the 2 were equals, and Lilith felt offended by the submissive and subservient role that she had to play as his wife. When the 2 were supposed to be intimate with another, Lilith allegedly said, "Why should I lie beneath you? I too was made from dust, and therefore I am your equal." And when Adam tries to force her to obey him, Lilith uttered the magic name of God and escaped Eden. Obviously, this is an oversimplification of the myth. If you want to look it up yourself, please do. But basically, because of this, Lilith then becomes the primordial baby-eating demon that we know today.
"And cursed is the fruit of thy womb. Demons, you fled the garden where the weak ones dwelt and did not live in shame."
The feminists of the 70s would hear this story and try to change it into being a story of a woman who is misunderstood, because the original story, no matter how you slice it, does villainize women who are strong, independent, or sexually liberated. This version of the story correlates women's desire for equality with the growing lack of traditional values that would have prioritized the woman's place in the home as a wife and a mother. Obviously, this book came out before the 70s, so it's not like these things are necessarily in conversation with each other. I just thought that it was really interesting how different people can interpret Lilith as a figure. As with most myths, it's up to interpretation, and the 70s revamped version of Lilith is a stand-in for societal fears of female sexuality. Whereas in the Narnia series, we don't really know much about Lilith at all, the same way that we don't really talk about Adam and Eve. It's more of a way to differentiate Jadis from any of the child protagonists, but still form a connection between them. I just felt like I had to touch on the idea of Lilith as a feminist figure in this video, because when I was rereading the books, I am in a lot of feminist circles. Specifically, I work for a feminist art collective, and whenever they would ask me about what I was reading and I would tell them about the Chronicles of Narnia, a lot of them would have a knee-jerk reaction when I told them Jadis's whole background being the daughter of Lilith, because this is the only interpretation of Lilith that they knew about. But I felt like I had to include it here because I need everybody to know that this whole Lilith is actually an icon thing is much more recent than they might think. Jadis is also called half giant. I will touch on the giants more in other books. And she is also called one of the jinn. Jinn or genie are supernatural beings from pre-Islamic Arabian religion. While they're not strictly an Islamic concept, the jinn may represent past pagan beliefs that were integrated into Islam, so you may see them in stories like 1001 Nights. From what I could find, because I'm not really an expert on the jinn and humans exist in the same plane in relation to God. Both are subject to divine judgment and an afterlife. The main difference between a human and a genie would be that a genie has supernatural powers. All of this to say that while Jadis may look close enough to being a human, she is not and has never been human. When we are first introduced to Jadis, she is a statuesque woman, beautiful but cruel. And this is further emphasized when she explains to Digory what happened to the world of Charn and why it is so desolate now. She had a sister, and the two of them were in an all-out civil war. Rather than let her sister win, Jadis chose to do the unthinkable and use the deplorable word. The deplorable word is a spell or a curse that when Jadis uttered it, it destroyed all life in the world of Charn except for her own, leaving her as the only survivor.
I wish everybody in the whole wide world would go away.
She then cast a sleeping spell on herself, leaving her unconscious for God knows how long, until Digory rang the bell. At first, Polly was the only one of the two that could tell that something was deeply wrong with this woman because Digory was in awe of her beauty. It's only until Jadis casually explains what she did that Digory truly starts to see what he has unleashed onto the world. Jadis is like Uncle Andrew, but worse. She flashed her horrible, wicked eyes upon me and said, "Victory." Yes, said I, "Victory, but not yours." And then I spoke the deplorable word. A moment later, I was the only living thing beneath the sun. "But the people," gasped Digory. "What people, boy?" asked the queen. "All the ordinary people," said Polly, "who'd never done you any harm. And the women, and the children, and the animals. Don't you understand?" said the queen, still speaking to Digory. "I was the queen. They were all my people. What else were they there for but to do my will?" "It was rather hard luck on them, all the same," said he. "I had forgotten that you are only a common boy. How should you understand reasons of state? You must learn, child, that what would be wrong for you or for any of the common people is not wrong in a great queen such as I. The weight of the world is on our shoulders. We must be freed from all rules. Ours is a high and lonely destiny." Digory suddenly remembered that Uncle Andrew had used exactly the same words. But they sounded much grander when Queen Jadis said them, perhaps because Uncle Andrew was not 7 feet tall and dazzlingly beautiful. The kids try to escape her, but if you are touching someone when they are using the rings, you escape with them, which means that Jadis teleports with them back to England. This entire time, Jadis has been picturing Uncle Andrew as a great magician, maybe even possibly kind of an equal to her. So imagine her disappointment when she meets Uncle Andrew and she finds him pathetic. Like, look at this giant woman just bossing him around. Jadis practically makes him her slave, and he is both obsessed with her and really scared of her. However, the witch very quickly realizes when she is in our world that her powers do not work here because she tries to use them on Aunt Letty. And you know what? Justice for Aunt Letty, because in her one big scene, because she really barely shows up in this book, all she does is call Uncle Andrew a mooch, and she calls Jadis a drunk and a hussy, and then Jadis picks her up and flings her like a muppet. She's fine, but she was flung like a muppet. This whole section of the book is just Jadis making a scene, so I'm gonna go over it really quickly. First, she steals a horse and a cab, and it might be my favorite illustration of her. She looks like she's having fun. And the cabbie that owns the horse freaks out and follows them as well because he wants his horse back. He will be joining this cast of characters as well. Then she gets into it with people on the street because she tells them that she is a queen and they should bow down to her, and everyone there just thinks that she's a crazy person, and so she grabs an iron rod off the street so that she can try to beat the cops with it. There's a line where the people in London are literally booing her, and she says, "Scum."
Scum?
"You shall pay dearly for this when I have conquered your world. Not one stone of your city will be left. I will make it as Charn." Finally, the kids are able to grab her and transport themselves back into that transitional space, back into the wood, but they accidentally take the cabbie, the horse, and Uncle Andrew with them. Once they're in the wood, they go into a different pool, not the one that's supposed to take them to Charn, and they end up in a dark, empty void. Apologies in advance, but I will have to read some passages from Genesis. You signed up for this video, I'm sorry. I'm only going to read the relevant verses here. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning the first day. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters, to separate water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it, and it was so. God called the expanse sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. God called the dry land earth, and the gathered waters he called the seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seeds in it, according to the various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seeds in it, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from night. Let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. Let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light to the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And he also made stars. God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light to the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the fourth day. In chapter 8, it says, "In the darkness something was happening at last. A voice had begun to sing. It was very far away, and Digory found it hard to decide from what direction it was coming. Sometimes it seemed to come from all directions at once. Sometimes he almost thought it was coming out of the earth beneath them. Its lower notes were deep enough to be the voice of the earth herself, but it was beyond comparison the most beautiful noise he had ever heard. It was so beautiful he could hardly bear it. Far away and down the horizon, the sky began to turn gray. A light wind, very fresh, began to stir. The sky in that one place grew slowly and steadily paler. You could see shapes and hills standing up dark against it. All the time, the voice kept on singing. The eastern sky changed from white to pink and from pink to gold. The voice rose and rose till all the air was shaking with it. And just as it swelled to the mightiest and most glorious sound it had yet produced, the sun arose. Digory had never seen such a sun. The sun above the ruins of Charn had looked older than ours. This looked younger. You could imagine that it laughed for joy as it came up. And as its beams shot across the land, the travelers could see for the first time what sort of place they were in. It was a valley through which a broad, swift river wound its way, flowing eastward towards the sun. Southward there were mountains, northward there were lower hills, but it was a valley of mere earth, rock, and water. There was not a tree, not a bush, not a blade of grass to be seen. The earth was of many colors. They were fresh, hot, and vivid. They made you feel excited until you saw the singer himself, and then you forgot everything else. It was a lion, huge, shaggy, and bright. It stood facing the risen sun. Its mouth was wide open in a song, and it was about 300 yards away. Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kind, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. The lion was pacing to and fro about that empty land and singing his new song. It was softer and more lifting than the song by which he had called up the stars and the sun, a gentle rippling music. And as he walked and sang, the valley grew green with grass. It spread out about the lion like a pool. It ran up the sides of the little hills like a wave. In a few minutes, it was creeping up the lower slopes of the distant mountains, making that young world every moment softer. The light wind could now be heard ruffling the grass. Soon there were other things beside grass. The higher slopes grew dark with heather. Patches of rougher and more bristling green appeared in the valley. Digory did not know what they were until one began coming up quite close to him. It was a little spiky thing that grew out dozens of arms, covered these arms with green, and grew larger at a rate of about an inch every 2 seconds. There were dozens of these things all around him now. Polly was finding the song more and more interesting because she thought she was beginning to see the connection between the music and the things that were happening. When you listened to his song, you heard the things he was making up. When you looked around you, you saw them. This was so exciting that she had no time to be afraid. Our first introduction to Aslan the Lion, son of the Emperor Beyond the Sea, is when he is singing Narnia into existence. All of the characters, except for Uncle Andrew and Queen Jadis, are in awe of his song, even if they are a little bit frightened by him because he is a giant wild lion. Uncle Andrew and Queen Jadis, on the other hand, do not feel any awe at all. Instead, they feel a sense of dread. But Jadis is particularly frightened of Aslan. In a way, she understood the music better than any of them. Her mouth was shut, her lips were pressed together, and her fists were clenched. Ever since the song began, she felt that this whole world was filled with a magic different from hers and stronger. She hated it. She would have smashed that whole world or all of the worlds to pieces if it would only stop the singing. The witch then reacts the way that she always does, with violence. She immediately tries to kill Aslan by using the iron rod that she brought back from England, except when she hurls it at him, it bounces off of him and sinks into the soil, growing back out as a lamppost. It was a perfect little model of a lamppost, about 3 feet high, but lengthening and thickening in proportion, as they watched it in fact growing just as the trees had grown. "Don't you see?" said Digory. "This is where the bar fell. The bar she tore off the lamppost at home. It sank into the ground, and now it's coming up as a young lamppost. But not so very young now." It was as tall as Digory when he said this. After not succeeding in killing Aslan, Jadis, now terrified, runs away. Uncle Andrew, on the other hand, though just as arrogant, I don't think he's as smart enough to know when it's not his place, because his reaction, however, is, "They laughed at my magic. That fool of a sister of mine thinks I'm a lunatic. I wonder what they'll say now. I have discovered a world where everything is bursting with life and growth. Columbus now, they talk about Columbus. But what is America to this? The commercial possibilities of this country are unbounded. Bring a few old bits of scrap iron here, bury 'em, and up they come as brand new railway engines, battleships, and anything you please. They'll cost nothing, and I can sell 'em at a full price in England. I shall be a millionaire. And then the climate! I feel years younger already. I can run it as a health resort. A good sanatorium here might be worth $20,000 a year. Of course, I shall have to let a few people into the secret. The first thing is to get that brute shot." "You're just like the witch," said Polly. "All you think of is killing things." And then as regards oneself, Uncle Andrew continued in a happy dream, "There's no knowing how long I might live if I settled here. And that's a big consideration when a fellow has turned 60. I shouldn't be surprised if I never grew a day older in this country. Stupendous, the land of youth." But Uncle Andrew isn't the only one thinking of what he can bring back from Narnia. Digory, though he has much better intentions, is also thinking of ways that he can save his mother by bringing something back from this land. "And God said, 'Let the water teem with living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens.' So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters teem, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them and said, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the water in the seas, and let birds increase on the earth.' And there was evening and there was morning, the 5th day." Aslan then similarly creates life on Narnia, as well as summons creatures like the satyrs, the dwarves, the river god, and his naiad daughters. He also gives some of the animals the power of speech. In page 28 it says, "Creatures, I give you yourselves. I give to you forever this land of Narnia. I give you the woods, the fruits, the rivers. I give you the stars. I give you myself. The dumb beasts whom I have not chosen are yours also. Treat them gently and cherish them, but do not go back to their ways, lest you cease to be talking beasts. For out of them you were taken, and into them you can return. Do not so." If I had a nickel for every book that I discussed on this channel this year that had the difference between animals and animals, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's odd that it has happened twice in the year of our Lord, 2025. This is where things start to stray from the biblical creation myth, so I'm not going to read the verses in Genesis that talk about the creation of Adam and Eve. Instead, the counterparts in Narnia that are like Adam and Eve are already descendants of Adam and Eve. You remember how I said that Jadis stole a horse and cab, and then the cabbie followed them, and then because of the magic of the rings, when the kids finally got to touch Jadis, they took him with them? That man's name is Frank. He and his wife Helen, who Aslan conveniently plucked right out of Earth and threw into Narnia, are going to be the first ever king and queen of Narnia. When they first meet, Aslan tells Frank that he has known him for a very long time and asks Frank if he knows Aslan. And Frank says that while he has never met Aslan in his lion form, he can't help but feel that he has known him for a long time in other ways. This confirms Aslan's dual role in the series as the Jesus Christ, because C.S. Lewis does not know what subtlety means. And while Narnia is another world or another dimension, that means that it is connected to our world, because then the Christian god of our world is also the emperor beyond the sea of their world, and the creation of Narnia is connected to the creation of our world, because Aslan says that only a daughter of Eve and a son of Adam can rule Narnia, and that wouldn't exist if our world didn't exist and Adam and Eve didn't exist in our world. They're together, they're connected. And speaking of the King and Queen of Narnia, if you've only ever seen the movie, then you're probably wondering where the heck the humans even were, if they did in fact exist before The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and I promise I will explain that in the next video. Some of the key themes of The Magician's Nephew include temptation and the fall of man, symbolized through characters like Digory and the Forbidden Fruit, put a pin in that for later, and with Jadis representing evil and its destructive consequences. Those themes were already touched on briefly when Digory and Polly enter the land of Charn, and Digory is tempted to strike the bell, which he does. And now, after the creation of Narnia, Digory is given a second chance. Aslan basically tells Digory that because it is his fault that Jadis has entered the land of Narnia, he must atone by helping protect the land from her evil. So Aslan takes the horse named Strawberry, changes him into a winged horse, changes his name to Fledge. Polly and Digory must then ride on Fledge all the way on a secret quest to a magic garden. Side note, I am a little mad that Aslan changes the horse's name. I know that the name is significant because now that he's a winged horse, his name is Fledge, but I think the name Strawberry for a horse is so precious that I'm mad that he is no longer named Strawberry. I don't want to dead name the horse. If he really likes being called Fledge, I'll call him Fledge. But Strawberry is such a precious name. I want to draw a strawberry horse now. So, the quest. Digory must... Do I have an apple? I don't... Hold on. I'm going to look at my fruit stash. Yes, I have a fruit stash. It's for crafting. I don't have an apple. All of my apples are with my Halloween decorations, and I don't want to open the box. So pretend that this is the forbidden fruit. Okay? They have to go to this garden because in this garden is the Tree of Youth. Digory must take an apple, take it back to Narnia where Aslan is, and plant it. But the garden has a special rule.
Come in by the gold gates or not at all. Take of my fruit for others or forbear. For those who steal or those who climb my wall shall find their heart's desire and find despair.
You never saw a place which was so obviously private. You could see at a glance that it belonged to someone else. Only a fool would dream of going in unless he had been sent there on very special business. Digory himself understood at once that the others wouldn't and couldn't come with him. He went forward to the gates alone. When Digory picks up an apple for his mission, Jadis appears. And considering the kids were on a flying horse and it took them more than a day to get there, it's pretty impressive that Jadis beat them to the tree. Yes, she ran away before the kids went on this mission, but logistically it seems a little impossible unless she somehow used her magic to get there. But considering that we see her use magic in the second book and she doesn't teleport anywhere, I don't really think that that's a skill that she has. So this just kind of feels like a bit of a weird plot thing.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Not only did Jadis beat them to the tree, but she has also already eaten the fruit. Yes, she is immortal now, but she can never feel happiness.
Who doesn't know anything about love or kindness or the joy of helping others. You know, sometimes I don't think she's really very happy.
She's also changed physically. Remember how I said that Lilith is usually represented as somebody with really pale skin? Well, Jadis is now extremely pale to the point where it's uncanny. She tries to tempt Digory into either A, eating the fruit himself and joining her in her immortality, or B, stealing the fruit without permission and taking it back to his dying mother. I know what errand you have come on, continued the witch, for it was I who was so close beside you in the woods last night and heard all of your counsels. You have plucked fruit in the garden yonder. You have it in your pocket now, and you are going to carry it back untasted to the lion, for him to eat, for him to use. You simpleton. Do you not know what that fruit is? I will tell you. It is the apple of youth, the apple of life. I know, for I have tasted it, and feel already such changes in myself, and I know I shall never grow old or die. Eat it, boy, eat it, and you and I will both live forever and be king and queen of this world, or of your world, if we decide to go back there. I don't know that I care much about living on and on after everyone I know is dead. I'd rather live in ordinary time and die and go to heaven. But what about this mother of yours who you pretend to love so? What's she got to do with it? Said Digory. Do you not see, fool, that one bite of that apple would heal her? You have it in your pocket. We are here by ourselves and the lion is far away. Use your magic and go back to your own world. A minute later, you can be at your mother's bedside, giving her the fruit. 5 minutes later, you will see the color coming to her face. She will tell you the pain is gone. Soon she will tell you she feels stronger. Then she will fall asleep. Think of that. Hours of sweet, natural sleep without pain, without drugs. Next day, everyone will be saying how wonderfully she has recovered. Soon she'll be quite well again. All will be well again. Your home will be happy again. You will be like other boys. And Digory considers all of this until she suggests that he leave Polly behind, and that's kind of what snaps him out of it. As you can probably tell, in this scene, Queen Jadis represents the serpent who tempts Eve, as she tries to persuade Digory to go against his own values and take the fruit without permission. In finally resisting this temptation, Digory has now triumphed over evil. And something that I think is really interesting as somebody who loves art history is that in Christian art, specifically in medieval and Renaissance art, the Serpent of Eden is often represented as a woman, sometimes identified as Lilith. So we've come full circle here. And this is usually to, probably for misogyny reasons, emphasize the seductiveness of the serpent, as well as make a connection between the serpent and Eve. In this case, Digory.
And of course, please remember that that does not necessarily mean that Lilith is canonically the serpent in the Garden of Eden. The idea that the serpent is Satan himself is later adopted into Christianity, and sometimes the serpent is a completely separate entity. It's a debate. I personally enjoy it when it kind of looks like a dragon.
Back in college, and I apologize in advance because I know that I'm about to go on a little bit of a tangent here. It'll make sense in the end. Bear with me here, okay? But back in college, I took an Italian Renaissance art history course for my art history minor. It was the last class that I took for my art history minor. Loved it, very nice. And the last thing that I had to do for that class was submit a paper that was gonna be like a huge percentage of my grade. I got a 99%. I no longer have it in my laptop. I am sure that it's in a drive somewhere, and if I can find it, I'm gonna list it, not the paper, but the sources that I used in that paper. I'm gonna put it in the description box because I'm gonna talk about some things here. But for that paper, I decided to focus on how the Virgin Mary was depicted in art from specifically the Renaissance era, obviously. And I specifically wanted to focus on the way that the church chooses to represent Mary in art. Because Mary is supposed to be the perfect woman in the eyes of the Catholic Church, they compare pretty much every other woman to the Virgin Mary, including other women in the Bible like Eve. And no one can measure up to the Virgin Mary because it's a very literal Madonna versus the whore complex thing with an added sprinkle of white supremacy, because another thing that I talk about in my paper is how this perfect image of the Virgin Mary is pretty much always painted as a white woman, and then this image of the Virgin Mary is what was being spread around by the colonizers when they were trying to force the indigenous people of the Americas to convert to Christianity. I'm not going to go into that part. Anyway, back to the whole misogyny aspect of that paper. For my research, I found this one very specific article. Once again, if I can find it, I'm going to link it in the description, But in that article, they specifically say that femininity is often villainized by the church unless it can be used to uphold a very specific standard. Using the Virgin Mary as an example of the perfect woman is an impossible standard to uphold because the average Catholic woman can't possibly be a loving mother and wife and also be a holy virgin, because in order to be a mother, you kind of have to do something to get that baby. You know what I mean? The Virgin Mary isn't even confirmed to be a virgin for her entire life until death. So even she can't be the Virgin Mary. Does that make sense? But in art, she can always be the beautifully pale, always pure young maiden who barely ever shows any signs of aging, despite the fact that she most certainly is not a teenager by the time Jesus is crucified, shedding a single tear because she is a self-sacrificing mother who was chosen by God and is always wearing pure white and light blue. And this is contrasted at the time with how artists depict other women in the Bible, specifically how they depict Eve, because Eve is oddly sexualized. And obviously when I talk about the sexualization of Eve, I'm not talking about her being naked, because obviously her and Adam are going to be nude in this scene. I have no problem with that at all. There's a certain seductiveness that we give Eve in this moment that doesn't really make sense to me. A lot of artists have chosen to depict Eve and the serpent as temptresses, equally femme fatales. And what is Jadis in the story of Narnia if not a femme fatale in the most child-friendly way possible? The simple definition for a femme fatale is an attractive and seductive woman, especially one who is likely to cause distress or disaster to a man who becomes involved with her. And in The Magician's Nephew, Polly can see right through Jadis. Aunt Letty can see right through Jadis. It takes Digory a while. Uncle Andrew is both obsessed with her and deeply frightened of her. And then let's not forget about her role in the next book that we're going to talk about. Obviously, I'm skipping ahead here, but I think we're all familiar with what happens between her and Edmund. Jumping off of that, I've had to delve into some Christian spaces online as I was looking up stuff for Narnia. I think obviously because I think a lot of fans are Christian and they're the ones that are active online. I went into Reddit subreddits. I went into the Narnia wiki that's kind of very clearly fan run. Like it's very active in there. There's like multiple pages. I found a bunch of blogs, specifically Catholic blogs, which I think is really interesting because for the longest time I was convinced that C.S. Lewis was fully Catholic, because I think online the Catholics really want to claim Narnia as their own, but no, he's fully Orthodox Anglican, separate thing. And I also saw a lot of Christians on their own blogs talking about Narnia, or they're reading Narnia for the first time and trying to, I guess, analyze it from an entirely Christian perspective. That's fine, and it was pretty helpful when I was looking up Christian symbolism. But I've also noticed that there's a separate camp of Christians who hate Narnia. As you can imagine, some Christians don't like Narnia because of the pagan influences. I'll talk more about that hopefully in other videos as well, just because there's a lot going on, right? But also, I noticed that a lot of Christians don't care for Narnia because they don't like how C.S. Lewis cherry picks what about Christianity he wants to represent in the books, or they don't like that while everyone calls it a Christian allegory, they expect it to have a very specific biblical timeline that obviously doesn't exist in the Narnia series. They're trying to find exact counterparts in each book to actual biblical figures, and then they get frustrated and they argue amongst themselves over who represents what. The series is obviously not supposed to be a one-to-one copy of the Bible, you know? Like, when I say allegorical elements, I mean allegorical elements. It's not that if you read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, it's an exact fantasy retelling of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Some characters are going to be inspired by multiple biblical figures, some by none at all, some are clearly an abstract concept in the story. Some of them are just vaguely similar to a biblical character. That doesn't mean that they were meant to represent that biblical character. His work doesn't exist in a vacuum, but I don't think that he was necessarily going, yes, this character is going to be inspired by Saint Matthew, and I'm going to write him exactly as I would imagine Saint Matthew in a fantasy setting. In Sometimes Fairy Stories May Say Best What's to Be Said from 1956, C.S. Lewis wrote, "Some people seem to think that I began by asking myself how I could say something about Christianity to children, then fixed on the fairy tale as an instrument, then collected information about child psychology and decided what age group I'd write for, then drew up a list of basic Christian truths and hammered out allegories to embody them. This is all pure moonshine. I couldn't write in that way. It all began with images, a fawn carrying an umbrella, a queen on a sledge, a magnificent lion. At first, there wasn't anything Christian about them. That element pushed itself on its own accord." Back to the book. Tangent is over. Once again, pretend this is an apple. Oh, and I didn't say it earlier. The apples were also silver. So, pretend that this is an apple and also that this apple is silver. When Digory, Polly, and Fledge, formerly Strawberry, return, they plant the apple, and it grows into a huge, beautiful tree. This tree is supposed to protect the land of Narnia for, I think, around 900 years because it has magical properties that repel the witch. Obviously, a lot of time passes between this book and this book, so by the time the Pevensies arrive, it no longer matters. With Aslan's permission, Digory is able to take a fruit from the new tree that he can use to cure his mother when he, Polly, and Uncle Andrew return back to England. If you've never read this book, I'm sure you're probably wondering to yourself, well, what about Uncle Andrew? Because he really didn't do much after a certain point in the book, and you would be right. I chose to skip over the bits about Uncle Andrew once they're in Narnia, just because I thought it was clunky to include in my summary, but Uncle Andrew has spent the last few pages essentially fleeing from all of the creatures in Narnia. After his little speech that I quoted earlier, he really doesn't do much. He's just kind of fleeing for his life because he can't understand the speech of the animals. I'll get to that in a second. And also, after Jadis comes in and she's the true villain of the story, his threat level becomes non-existent.
You can't outdo the doer.
So the reason that Uncle Andrew can't understand what the animals in Narnia are saying is explained in page 136. When the great moment came and the beast spoke, he missed the whole point, for a rather interesting reason. When the lion had first begun singing long ago, when it was still quite dark, he had realized that the noise was a song, and he had disliked the song very much. It made him think and feel things that he did not want to think and feel. Then, when the sun rose and he saw that the singer was a lion, only a lion, he said to himself, he tried his hardest to make believe that it wasn't singing and never had been singing, only roaring as any lion might in a zoo in our world. Of course, it can't really have been singing, he thought. I must have imagined it. I've been letting my nerves get out of order. Who ever heard of a lion singing? And the longer and more beautiful the lion sang, the harder Uncle Andrew tried to make himself believe that he could hear nothing but roaring. Now, the trouble about trying to make yourself stupider than you really are is that you very often succeed. Uncle Andrew did. He soon did hear nothing but roaring in Aslan's song. Soon he couldn't have heard anything else, even if he wanted to. And when at last the lion spoke and said, "Narnia, awake," he didn't hear any words. He only heard a snarl. And then the beast spoke in answer, and he only heard barking, growling, baying, and howling. And when they laughed, well, you can imagine. That was worse for Uncle Andrew than anything that happened yet. Such a horrid, bloodthirsty ding of hungry and angry brutes he had never heard in his life. Then, to his utter rage and horror, he saw the other three humans actually walking into the open to meet the animals. The fools, he said to himself. Now those brutes will eat the rings along with the children, and I'll never be able to get home again. What a selfish little boy Digory is. And the others are really just as bad. If they want to throw away their lives, that's their business. But what about me? In page 185, when Aslan is talking to the children, he's the only one that can't understand him, and it says, "This world is bursting with life for these few days because of the song with which I called it into life still hangs in the air and rumbles in the ground. It will not be so for long. But I cannot tell that to this old sinner, and I cannot comfort him either. He has made himself unable to hear my voice. If I spoke to him, he would only hear growlings and roarings. Oh, Adam's sons, how clearly you defend yourself against all that might do you good." A lot of people take issue with moments like these in the Narnia series because, I mean, I get it. It can feel like C.S. Lewis is specifically trying to convert you. And when you're not a religious person and you don't want to be a particularly religious person, you just want to read a fantasy book, it can kind of suck you out a little bit because it feels very pointed. That's something that I think you might need to think about if you're a non-religious person and you want to pick up the Narnia books. There will be many moments like this. I knew what I was getting into. I knew that I was reading a Christian fantasy. I think after reading a lot of C.S. Lewis's personal life, I think that this is purely projection. I think that this is based off of his own personal journey with religion because C.S. Lewis was an atheist for a pretty large chunk of time, and then he became deeply religious. And I think just because of the fact that it is a Christian book, with all of the weight that carries, sometimes you might cringe a little bit if you're not a religious person. But at the same time, if this was a book that I read that was inspired entirely by Greek mythology, something I do enjoy studying as well, if a character was like, well, that's what you get for not listening to the gods, I'd be like, yeah, that's what they get. It's the hubris. So, you know, I've accepted it as part of the world building. Anyway, last chapter. With his mother now miraculously cured and his father back from India, Digory gets to have a happy family and they get to move into their own house. After his mom eats of the fruit, Digory takes what's left of the apple core and he takes his Uncle Andrew's magic rings and he plants both of them in the backyard of his aunt's house in London. Just like in Narnia, this sprouted a nice, large, beautiful tree. Years later, a big storm blows the apple tree down, and Digory, who is now an older professor, takes the wood from that tree and builds a wardrobe. Hint, hint. Digory and Polly stay good friends for the rest of their lives. There is no romantic subplot, by the way, and we will see the both of them again in the future. Final thoughts. Near the end of the book, in page 194, Aslan gives the kids a warning. It says, "It is not certain that some wicked one of your race will not find out a secret as evil as the deplorable word and use it to destroy all living things. And soon, very soon, before you are an old man and an old woman, great nations in your world will be ruled by tyrants who care no more for joy and justice and mercy than the Empress Jadis. Let your world beware." Aslan can see that in their world, our world, the people can be ruled by arrogance and greed, which will lead to tyranny. The villains in the story, both Uncle Andrew and Queen Jadis, use incredibly similar language to try to win Digory over. Ours is a high and lonely destiny. Both of the characters in this book are vain and selfish people who don't care what they have to do to get ahead. Consequences be damned. No pun intended, I guess, if we're talking about Jadis.
Both characters believe that they are fundamentally better than everybody else. They both believe that there is something inside them that inherently makes it so that they should rule or have some kind of power over other people.
Digory, who is a foil and a mirror to both of them, is tempted in more ways than one. The lonely part of ours is a high and lonely destiny is also proven by Jadis twice. Once when she destroyed everything on her own homeworld, and twice when she ate of the fruit in order to be immortal. And both times, even though she technically gets what she wanted, she can't really enjoy the outcome. Yes, she technically wins, but it's not really a fun celebration, is it? The first time she does it, she was basically asleep the entire time until Digory could ring the bell, and even if she wasn't asleep for all that time, what could she have possibly been doing anyway? Just chilling in the ruins of a palace? No friends, no servants, no nothing? Just one person all alone. Like, you won, but can you even really enjoy that victory? And then the second time with the fruit, yes, she becomes immortal, but she can never feel happiness again. Her stubbornness and incredibly blasé attitude towards violence and death literally just win her emptiness. And Uncle Andrew doesn't even get to remember any of this at all. And even if he did, what could he have possibly said anyway? Like, yes, I was willing to sacrifice children to get what I wanted, and I didn't even get anything out of that. Because C.S. Lewis lived through both world wars and lost loved ones because of it, I don't think it's really shocking that he includes sentiments like this in not just The Magician's Nephew, but in the rest of the Narnia series. I also can't help but feel that C.S. Lewis used The Magician's Nephew as a bit of wish fulfillment near the end of the story. I personally don't think that you need to know everything about an author's life to understand their literature. I don't think that it's necessary. I feel like a lot of people do this nowadays. They feel like they need to pick apart a person's childhood or trauma to understand the work that they're creating. Sometimes it's not necessary. It can definitely help you, I guess, if you want to understand why they wrote it or understand their intentions behind the work, especially if they're no longer there to talk about their work themselves, and you just want to know more about the author. I can understand that. But I feel like a book should be able to stand on its own two legs, because you as the reader should be able to interpret it however you want within reason. You can't just make stuff up. It's interesting to look at an author's life and try to see if there's something else there for fun. We're doing this for fun. And I think knowing what I know now about his childhood, I do read The Magician's Nephew differently. Because after facing his mother's death, Lewis wrote in Surprised by Joy, "Grief in childhood is complicated with many other mysteries. I was taken into a bedroom where my mother lay dead, as they said, to see her. In reality, as I at once knew, to see it. There was nothing that a grown-up would call disfigurement, except for that total disfigurement, which is death itself. Grief was overwhelmed in terror. To this day, I do not know what they mean when they call dead bodies beautiful. The ugliest man alive is an angel compared to the loveliest of the dead. Against all of the subsequent paraphernalia of coffin, flowers, hearse, and funeral, I reacted with horror. But in The Magician's Nephew, Aslan gives Digory a miracle. He saves his mother. Digory gets to have the happy ending that I think Lewis himself would have wanted at that age. Even though Digory can never return to Narnia, at least not anytime soon, more on that later, he has a sense of hope because he knows that someday other children will get to go to Narnia and fix what he broke. Even though he won't get to experience that kind of magic again, it is the magic of Narnia that saved his mother. His mom is now happy and healthy, and he gets to stay with her for way longer than C.S. Lewis probably got to keep his own mom. Overall, The Magician's Nephew is a very heavy-handed but hopeful prequel, which is kind of shocking considering it came out right before the last battle, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I don't have the patience for it right now. Thanks so much for watching this video. If you made it all the way to the end, I'm really excited to get to talk about some more controversial books later on because, oh boy, are these books a doozy. Remember to like, share, subscribe, all of that good stuff. And in the comments, let me know if you actually like The Magician's Nephew and if there's anything in particular that you're excited to see in Greta Gerwig's adaptation of this book. Everything I've heard so far about the production sounds like a fever dream, but The Magician's Nephew isn't as popular as The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, so I'm cautiously optimistic because I do kind of want to know how someone is going to adapt this book, or if Greta Gerwig is going to adapt more than one of the books. I don't really know what the plan there is. I didn't really talk about the upcoming movie or series. I don't really understand what Gerwig's vision is just yet. Only know what I see in occasional Twitter headlines. So I didn't really want to talk about it too much in this video, but who knows? It could be really good. I hear Meryl Streep is playing Aslan.
Meryl Streep could play Batman and be the right choice. She's perfection.
And there was a now debunked rumor saying that Charlie XCX was allegedly in the running to play Jadis the White Witch. It just screams chaotic, which could be a good thing. I don't know. We'll see. Oh, and friendly reminder, if you need art for the holidays, or if you just want to commission a portrait just because, I am in fact available. Pretty much all I do usually around December is draw anyway. So I would love to take some commissions, even if they're not for the holidays, even if you want to commission me January, February, who knows. I am currently available. My commissions are in fact open. Just wanted to remind you of that before I leave. Bye!